aware of any other history regarding like LGBTQ or anything like that.
I had friends and we all kind of knew, but no one ever really like talked about it publicly.
I teach courses that deal with gender and sexuality and inequality, and I think initially I was even surprised that the department was comfortable.
Founded in 1839 as the Farmville Female Seminary, Longwood University remains one of the 100 oldest institutions of higher education in the United States, remaining as an all-women's college until 1968. History has a penchant for straight-washing its narratives. The ghosts of Longwood University most likely have a similar story to tell. So, in the fall of 2023, students in COMM 380, LGBTQ+ in the media, began asking about Longwood University's queer history in search of these ghosts and their impact on the school. In search of multiple perspectives and speaking to various alumni, students, faculty, and staff, the COMM 380 students began to uncover queer Longwood.
Try these.
Straight-washing, or treating stories as inherently heterosexual, is a common practice throughout media history. Any words associated with a queer identity were not even acknowledged in private, let alone in public or in the media. In fact, Karl Heinrich Ulrich was the first person to publicly write about and acknowledge his queer sexuality in 1862. And the Daughters of Bilitis and the Mattachine Society began holding secret meetings and publishing magazines in the 1950s. Think about the All-American Girls Baseball League of the 1940s, which multiple historians and the Amazon Prime series A League of Their Own in 2023 has sought to address just how queer these women were.
But listen, I was thinking about it. I'm going to take you out on that date. Next time we have a night off, I'll take you somewhere special.
Really? That'd be okay?
I think so. Okay.
Another example is how publishers and teachers over the years sold the narrative of Emily Dickinson as a recluse, a woman in white who had no romantic relationships. Yet historians, again, have uncovered a queer retelling through her letters and poems that tell a different story, one that involved her neighbor, sister-in-law, and best friend, Sue Gilbert. The Apple TV show Dickinson even acknowledged this by making Emily and Sue's relationship a major component of the series.
I wouldn't worry too much about that one.
Longwood students would have been reading Emily Dickinson and might have even heard the All-American Girls baseball games on the radio. They may have been recipients of The Ladder, the magazine that the Daughters of Bilitis published and sent in brown packaging via mail to hide its contents. So there are stories to tell here. We just have to find these ghosts and hear what they have to say.
While doing research through the Longwood database, finding research that related to the queer community in Farmville was challenging.
We do stuff to make assumptions and inferences and piece together kind of from multiple things, and or the silences where things are just completely missing also tell you something where you feel like there should be something and there's just nothing.
To officially look up things, we had to use terms like same-sex, homosexual, and sexuality. In 1975, Longwood held a sexuality forum to discuss sexuality. While some of the speakers were not opposed to sexuality, there were some that stated it was against the law and referred to passages from the Bible. In 1976, the Longwood newspaper The Rotunda posted an article relating to bisexual and homosexuality. It also features students' personal experiences as a queer individual. One identifying female bisexual stated that she believes 40 to 50% of Longwood's campus is gay, and that they should not be blatant about their homosexuality or bisexuality while on campus, in bars, or in the community. In 1996, the Farmville Herald had an article stating how same-sex marriages could make some people happy, but not society as a whole, and it references the AIDS epidemic and states how it started within the gay male community. It was not until the late 90s and early 2000s where we found articles posted by the Rotunda that openly welcomed the gay community. In 1994, the Rotunda posted a poster in the newspaper regarding the gay, lesbian, and bisexual support group and their number. As the years progress and gay marriage is legalized in Virginia, Longwood has made more efforts to make their queer individuals have a sense of community and feel supported.
When I first arrived, there were people on campus that we assumed or suspected that were gay. But at that time, coming out and all of that stuff was not popular or wasn't the thing to do. So you had a lot of closeted cases. Near the end, maybe I think 1990, they came out with a hotline at the time. And so if you were or thought you were queer or LGBTQ, of course, they weren't using those letters at the time, but then you could call the hotline and talk to this group or talk to someone if you had, concerns or issues, and someone from that group would call you back. But it was still all pretty much anonymous.
I would definitely say that there was. I wasn't very active with it to begin with, but got more involved as time went on.
I remember there being an LGBTQ plus club. I think I went to one meeting, but then after that, I don't think it fit my vibe.
It was a little bit of bullying, but I think, and that's why I think a lot of people kind of stayed in the closet, if you will. I didn't really see any of the bullying. I think people suspected, about me, but because I've always been so tall and whatever, and they didn't roll up on me like that because.
Honestly, I think it was very open. I think Longwood just in general was very an open and safe space. I can only remember once or twice there was hate crimes towards I don't even know. Just I think around voting season, just about people's views about stuff.
Right.
But I don't think it was necessarily towards LGBTQ that I can remember. But I think it's very inviting. I think everyone kind of has a safe space, especially on campus and stuff.
I wouldn't say that it was terrible, but it also wasn't great. I guess it was kind of a middle of the road. No one really asked for I guess I never had issue. My identity didn't really come up a lot. Definitely had people who were super kind and supportive. And I made lots of queer friends while I was here at Longwood. But for the most part, it was kind of very chill, very casual. I didn't think people were torn any which way about queer people on the campus.
That's why they kind of created the hotline, because some of the people were definitely because I had a good friend of mine who was sort of one of the people that monitored the hotline, and so he would never share names and stuff like that, but we would hear different stories of people calling in saying they were being harassed and that kind of thing, because again, this is all, I wouldn't say brand new, but being gay wasn't popular back then.
Queer people who have that added element of intersectionality. So, queer people of color, maybe queer people coming from different religious or ethnic backgrounds. There is always that kind of haunting, kind of looming feeling of you never know. I came from an area growing up that just was not very kind towards queer people. And so I guess I kind of got used to contending with that feeling. But I wouldn't say no that I ever felt unsafe by any means. Again, there were certainly instances in which I would call certain things into question, learning certain information about maybe a staff member or an administrator. But other than that, not too many issues, I would say overall.
fortunately for me, I'm from the area. I grew up in Cumberland, and my grandmother lived in Farmville, as well as my aunts. And my grandmother lived maybe about 10 minutes from the campus. So, having that family's, support and all of that, although at the time, they didn't know my sexuality because at the time, I didn't even want to admit it to myself. So, but no, I never felt threatened or anything like that on or off campus.
During my time, like when I was president of the Pride organization, and mind you, I went from not being very involved as a queer person in queer groups on the campus at all to like leading one, which is funny. But yeah, like during my final semester, just shy of like me graduating, there was an instance where we had a little bit of trouble with a singular member, and it pulled some of the administration into it. And I would definitely say that during those conversations, it's not that I necessarily felt treated differently or like treated badly. Let me say that, treated badly, but it was definitely like it just wasn't clicking for the individuals that we were talking to, like those staff members that we were talking to. There was a lot of assumption about our situation, and it just was very clear to me that there was like, I'm like, when you think about like anytime like if a multicultural office is like getting involved right with anything, or like administration staff, people who would supposedly you would hope would have diversity, equity, and inclusion training. I'm like, there was a lot of like holes in like reasoning, and in some of the conversations that we had, like it just felt like that they were massively ill-informed and lacked the context and the knowledge of queer experiences to really be having some of the conversations that they were having with us. I think after the fact, they had a better time of understanding kind of where we were, but it was a very rough patch getting through that initially.
I feel like it was more like welcoming and inviting because as a health and PE major and teacher now, I had like friends who were also in the program who were a part of that community, and our professors specifically like didn't have any problems obviously, and still loved us, and we were able to talk about like our personal lives whenever it came to that. So it was very inviting, and everyone was really cool about it and open.
Because of being a part of the Longwood Black Alumni Association and being the president of it, actually, I always come back to campus. Yeah, right. Plug for the LBAA. But I always come back to campus. And I will tell you, Faith, one of the things that was so shocking to me, it was about maybe 2011 or 12. Came back to campus. And so we went to this party that was in the basement of Eiler Gym at the time. And so there was these group of guys that were, in terms of the gay community, they would have probably been labeled as queens, because they was like, they was sashaying and they had their little purses and everything, right? And so when we walked into the party and I saw them, I'm like, oh my gosh, Longwood's campus has changed because this wasn't here. And so what was so funny was, so right after they came in, so it was like a group of basketball players that came in. And so I'm like, this is not going to be well. Because, the basketball players all quote unquote masculine and all of that. And I'm like, this is going to be a mess. They probably going, they're going to probably say something to them. They're going to pick on them. Then somebody's going to want to fight. So I just kind of stood in the corner and stood back. And to my surprise, when the basketball players walked in, they came over to the guys that were quote unquote, and they all were just talking and laughing and joking. And I was like, yeah. And they acted, the basketball players acted normal as well as the other guys. They acted normal, and everybody was laughing and joking and having a good time. And I even said to myself that night, I was like, Longwood has come a long way.
There's been a much greater drive for recognizing the intersectionality within the queer population at Longwood, especially for queer students of color, which I personally have come to thoroughly enjoy. I know that oftentimes it felt like students of color, especially Black students, didn't have like a real space in the Pride organization. Our demographic was primarily white. And even though Longwood's overall population is mostly white, I feel like there should have been greater strides for inclusivity, even within, what is supposed to be an already inclusive space. So I've seen a lot of that push on the campus, which I've come to love and just really enjoy. And I, just hope that continues to become more grounded and firm. I would love to see Longwood become like a true safe place for queer students of color.
We're a small school in a small Virginia town. I wasn't surprised by the faculty being pretty accepting of people generally, but I thought there'd be a little more caution about curriculum and things like that.
So I arrived at Longwood in 2018. 2018 was my first year here. And I pretty much jumped right into, let's develop queer classes. Let's get involved and find out who is on campus. What is the queer community? Because for me, as an undergrad and even as a grad student in college, some of the biggest things for me was, where is my community? Because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have probably been as successful or done as well or felt connected in any way. And so having that makes a difference in your success, right? And if you feel connected in your community or in some way you feel connected or find a community in any way, and that's not just queerness, right? It's that if you find your community, you are able to do better. You're better able to succeed, not just in life, but in college, things like that. So it was important to me when I got here to find that. Where is that here at Longwood?
When I first came, that there still weren't a ton of out students, and there definitely were very few out faculty. Those who were women. It's always been more difficult for men to be out. There were some women who were out, and generally it just wasn't a thing that was talked about a whole lot for the first few years that I was here. And that's kind of surprising, right? Because with the history of being an all-women's school, I don't know if you're aware, but, generally all female schools were places of kind of safety, right, for queer women. And I actually have some archival images from the early 20th century here at Longwood that at least indicate people who were gender nonconforming.
Longwood has, while there are obviously, there's always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. I have noticed here that we do have a pretty decent community with regards to support. It's just making sure that students and other faculty members, community people like that know this stuff, because it exists. You just got to know what to look for. And sometimes you don't know what to look for. So I have been the advisor for Pride for the past 2-3 years. So I started over COVID, when COVID happened, right? And so trying to get the community to feel involved when they were so separated was an interesting challenge, right? It's like, here, your community's here, but they're home, and there's a safety issue, right? A safety and a privacy issue, a security issue, when it comes to queer students who were, I don't want to say trapped, but like they were in communities or non-affirming spaces. So providing them that space to still feel connected was a challenge, right? Because it could only be via Zoom. And then coming back, when we came back in person, it created that similar challenge of, we're already exhausted, we're burned out. And so what do we do with regards to pulling our community in? And I have to give Aubrey Gray some credit here, right? Because he was the president during this time, and he really pulled that in, right? He and his executive board were very much, let's make sure that this exists. We need this for ourselves. We need to make sure that this doesn't die out, because this can't be one of the things that we lose because of COVID.
I think by 2002, there was sort of a general acceptance, but still not a comfort level on the part of students and faculty of being out, you know. But by 2009, for sure, because I was the advisor at that time for the then, so there had been 2 earlier LGBT organizations kind of before I got here, and I never really knew what was up with them. So I think they were called Unity and Alliance, and they got put together to form Unity Alliance. You know, from the beginning, I think there was always a kind of tension about, you know, how much the organization wanted to be like a social and support kind of organization and how much they wanted to be an activist organization. And Longwood students, I think, have always been very hesitant about activism, and especially back then, because things were still a little like, you know, a lot of our students were from small towns and they were worried about being outed and that sort of thing.
And I've seen some really cool things come from the Pride group here. I've seen connections with Gamer Lambda. I've seen connections with the class group. Some cool stuff is happening, right? It's just getting it to go, right? We've got these great ideas. We're very much citizen leader kids here, right? Like very much students are very much taking that citizen leadership to heart. And so I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that in the Pride group. I'm seeing that in the class group. I'm seeing that in Gamer Lambda. They want more visibility. They want to have these conversations. And so it's just trying to help them as faculty, right? Trying to help them get there, to have those conversations, to have those classes so that the community is more open and Longwood is more affirming and open.
The Women's and Gender Studies program, and particularly in sociology, our gender and society class was more connected to the family studies program, right? Than to more like queer studies. And so when I teach the class, you know, it's a anthropology, sociology, cross-listed class. And so we actually spend a lot of time looking at gender systems in other societies where there are other genders of people besides men and women traditionally. And so that anthropological part of the class, I think, is really attractive to a lot of trans and non-binary students who are trying to make sense of where they fit and to get some knowledge about people like them in other societies historically and so on.
Cook Cole College of Arts and Science. So I never knew that Cook and Cole were in a relationship.
Yeah, look behind you over there and you'll see a copy of the Longwood magazine from when they endowed us. That's them. So I actually got to meet them several times before they died. And they used to come to campus quite often, and they brought April, and they made her little ruffs for the seasons and the holidays. So she had, you know, she was dressed up, you know, for whatever season it was when they came to campus. And I talked to them a couple of times about this. They were out. In fact, there's a book, and I have a copy of it somewhere. I'll have to see if I can find it. That's about sort of gay history in Richmond, where they're mentioned because they lived in Richmond. And you know, when I did have a conversation with them about, you know, what it was, sort of how they'd managed to be out in Richmond, their response was essentially, we had money, right? And that money, to some degree, bought them the ability to be. They were definitely out in circles of people who would acknowledge someone being out, but there was also that very traditional Southern, we're just not going to talk about it kind of thing. At the time when they endowed the college, it was like an open secret. I don't know if they requested that the university not state clearly that they were a couple, or if that was something that the institution did for political reasons, because you'll notice in the magazine when the announcement was made, they're discussed together, but there's not a statement that they were clearly together, right? So they're like next to each other, right? And you see the picture on the cover. So it was sort of like people who knew, and people who didn't want to know didn't have to know.
I'm the president of the Pride organization here at Longwood, and I had anonymously interviewed the Pride members at our last meeting to see what they thought of Longwood in regards to the queer community. There doesn't seem to be like a lot of like visible discrimination that's going on, but they noticed that there's not vocal like positivity either towards the community. It's just very quiet. Like it's not mentioned, kind of like not seen, not heard. There's not a lot of talk about it. So they regard it as pretty much safe, but they also don't know how people feel about the community still because it's not vocalized.
I think that there's definitely positive experiences you can have in the community, but I think you'd probably have to seek them out, and they necessarily wouldn't just like fall into your lap. Like I know there's a pride group that meets and like they offer support, and like CAPS offers support and stuff, but I also know that sometimes people can be pretty ignorant, and definitely like encountered that on campus before.
At Longwood, I haven't been met with really anything but kindness. There have been like offhanded like comments that I feel like come out of people just not knowing, like a lack of education on the topic, but it's never been anything malicious.
I asked an RCL staff member, student staff member in the dorms, and asked them about how the LGBTQ presence is inside the dorms and how the student staff reacts to LGBTQ presence. And they mentioned that it's pretty positive. On their floor, they see a lot of support for the LGBTQ community. They see a lot of queer individuals in the student staff. And me personally, presenting projects and ideas to RCL for things like housing preference forms and lavender housing, they seem to respond very well to it.
I've definitely had experiences before where people have said offhanded comments or like just made me feel like I wasn't fully a person. And yeah, definitely. And it hasn't been a lot, but I mean, like it's happened before.
Like, you know the stereotype, like, good girls play softball. People have been like, oh, are you on the softball team? No.
It's been interesting. I've experienced a little bit of like odd discrimination. Like it's not like how dare you be gay, but I could tell like with a former roommate that they weren't very comfortable with it, and that's something that with my projects that I presented to RCL, that was a big thing because not only have I experienced it, but I've heard other people experience it. And as an RA as well, I have seen other people experience concern of being discriminated against because of their sexuality or their gender identity.
Joan of Arc is the patron saint of Longwood University, and historical records indicate Joan presented as a man in her gender expression and lifestyle, which is what actually led to her execution. For this reason, Joan of Arc's gender identity and sexuality have long been debated. This also means that she's become an icon in the LGBTQ+ community. For her to be the patron saint of Longwood University, I wonder if any students past and present were able to find this connection, one much stronger than one of female empowerment. Today, Longwood's mission is one of citizen leadership, meaning that students do more than learn about various subjects in school. They also learn how to take that knowledge and become leaders in their jobs, their communities, and even the world. Advocacy for the queer community has been a part of Longwood's campus for a few decades now, starting with the Unity Alliance, and students are getting to have more open and authentic experiences that former Longwood students did not get to have.